My name's Mark Edwards and I write psychological thrillers for Thomas and Mercer. They're books in which scary things happen to ordinary people. I started out self-publishing in 2011 and then in 2013 I was signed to Thomas and Mercer, and now I've published 8 books for Thomas and Mercer, sold 2 million books and had 7 #1 bestsellers. The marketing support that I get from Amazon is fantastic, so whenever I have a new novel out, people know that it's out there and my readers can find it very easily. I constantly receive emails and messages from readers. They say really nice things. For example, they hadn't read a book for years, or they'd gone off reading and then they'd read one of my books and it had reinvigorated their love of reading. It's really nice to receive messages like that. Amazon are really great at consulting the author, letting me know what's going on, asking questions. It feels like a partnership. It feels like we're working together to further my career and sell as many books as possible. One of the most exciting things when Follow You Home, my 3rd book, hit the top 10 in the USA, and it sold 500,000 copies, and it was fantastic. It was a life-changing amount of books that were sold. Another highlight was when The Retreat hit #1 in the bestseller charts on its first day of release. Ever since I was a kid listening to the top 40, I've always wanted to be able to say that I'd gone straight in at #1, and I achieved it when that happened.
You are joining with audiences from across the globe to enjoy Harrogate's International Festival's series of online events, streamed straight from our home to yours. Sit back, relax, and enjoy writing in the age of a pandemic as part of the Theakston Old Peculiar Crime Writing Festival, sponsored by Thomas and Mercer. We promise you've got the best seats in the house.
So hello and welcome to this virtual panel on writing in the age of a pandemic. Now quarantine, lockdown, social distancing, COVID-19, it's affected us all to varying degrees. And today I'm going to be talking to 3 fantastic writers about how it's affected them, how it's affected their lives, their writing, and what they think the implications will be for the crime genre and publishing in general. Now, normally with a panel, I would throw it open to questions from the audience at the end, which obviously I cannot do with this one. But I have crowdsourced a few in advance, which I will be sprinkling in as we go, as and where they kind of dovetail with what I was going to be asking anyway. But before we get started on the discussion, I just want to briefly introduce everybody who's joining me today. So starting with A.A. Dhand. Amit was raised in Bradford. He's a qualified pharmacist, and he's written 4 brilliant crime thrillers featuring Harry Verdi. Harry's many things. He's a detective, he's a progressive British Sikh, and I think it's fair to say he is a force of nature. Books deal with serious social issues such as race, cultural identity, exploitation, and violence, and play out against the backdrop of a vividly rendered contemporary Bradford. So welcome, Amit. It's good to have you here. Next up, we have Amanda Jennings. Amanda has a degree in the history of art, but edged closer towards a life of crime with her debut novel, Sworn Secret, in 2012. She's written a number of acclaimed psychological thrillers since, generally exploring the dark secrets that affect families. Her latest novel, The Storm, is a story of a toxic marriage and coercive control, and is due to be published at the end of July 2020, which is a few weeks away from us, but by the time you're watching this, it should be available to buy. And last but not least, Emma Cavanaugh has a PhD in psychology and has worked as a police and military psychologist. She trained firearmed officers and military personnel, and her specialism is human performance in extreme conditions. Her string of best-selling crime novels began with 2014's Falling, and her latest novel, The Devil You Know, was released at the end of May during the height of lockdown. So welcome to all of you. And I have questions, but I'm just going to deviate from my script a little bit to say it's really good to see you all, you know? In a few... It's just great because, you know, normally in a few weeks we would all be congregating outside the Old Swan and we would have been catching up at festivals, which of course have all been cancelled this year. So we will just have to make do with this in the meantime. But it's really good to see you. Amit, I wanted to start with you first of all, because in addition to writing, as I mentioned, you work as a pharmacist, so you have kind of been on the front line through all this. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience and how the last few months have been for you.
Yeah, I think it's been the most difficult time in my career, and I think it's mostly because everything happened so quickly, and we kind of had this feeling that COVID might be landing on the UK shores, but the conversations were like, oh no, it'll be fine, and then within a period, and I remember this vividly in the pharmacy, within a period of about 3 or 4 days, the doctor's surgeries were closed, and our doors were open, so literally everybody was almost funneled through community pharmacy, and because there had been no preparation, there was a huge amount of work, panic, and drama, because community pharmacy was the only people that had their doors open, and I think that people were panic ordering prescriptions. People who couldn't get to the GP were coming to the pharmacy. And nobody really knew what the right play was. So I think that, it probably was the most stressful time I think I've ever had. I mean, we had staff working till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. You can imagine that the entire workload, everybody panicked and wanted to order prescriptions. Everybody wanted to speak to the pharmacist. So it was unlike anything that I have ever known.
Has it kind of calmed down a bit now? Or?
It's calmed down a bit now. I think there's still a lot of confusion out there in terms of what you can and can't do. I mean, 2 meters, and then a few days later it's 1 meter, and then it's 1 meter plus. And I think that nobody really knows to wear a mask, not wear a mask. And I think that, just from a healthcare perspective, if those guys on the shop floor are confused, you can imagine that the general public and patients, what it does to them. So, it's eased up a little bit, but I think everybody's now got that. Everybody's afraid of a second wave, and really nobody knows what that's going to look like.
Right. Yeah. And how has the experience kind of affected your writing? Have you been able to write during this time, or have you been too busy, too sort of preoccupied, or?
Yeah, well, I had a deadline for the 1st of June, believe it or not, and as ever, I'm a pressure worker, and I'm very much a lastminute.com. When the timeline is short, that's when I do my best work. But obviously, I was working 70, 80 hours a week at the pharmacy, so it did affect what I would normally do, because I tend to write at night time, and I was just so shattered throughout the day, and I was so stressed. So I think the final edit that I did was probably affected by it, and I think that depending on where your deadlines were, I think it probably could have had an impact. But yeah, for me, it definitely did affect me in that final 6 weeks where I tend to do my best work. My head was all over the place.
Right, yeah. So you were the kind of kid who always revised the night before the exam, that kind of thing. You do your best.
That is me. Yeah. I'm a pressure worker. Yeah, I do my best work when the deadline is looming, the pressure is getting to me, and for some reason I've just always worked that way.
Well, you have to find your own way of doing things. Have you been able to read at all? Because one of the things I've found reading very, very hard. Have you been able to concentrate on that, keep up with the new releases?
Actually, that's the one thing that has been beneficial is I've managed to put my phone away, because I got so tired of this mass hysteria on social networks, and whether it's to do with race relations or whether it's to do with COVID. I don't access my phone now past 8 o'clock. I just put it away, and I've started reading a huge backlog of work that I haven't managed to get to, and it's calmed me down. It's made me focus more, and I have actually reconnected with books in a big way, just purely by refusing to access social media networks.
It's probably a very wise thing. Speaking of social media, moving on to you, Emma, it's impossible to escape from your social media feed that you have had COVID, and you've had it quite badly. No, but you have spoken quite openly about it. So, I mean, could you tell us a little bit about what your experience has been and how it's affected you?
Yeah, so we came down with it. My eldest son got sent home from school 14 weeks ago on Tuesday.
Entices,
so 14 and a half weeks ago. The kids were under the weather, but generally fine. If I hadn't known better, I'd have sent them to school. They weren't noticeably ill. My husband was noticeably ill, but was able to work through it. For the first couple of days, I was, I'm not well, but I'm okay. And then on day 10, it slammed me like a train. And then I think I was off work for 5 weeks. So literally, like, could get up, couldn't get dressed, but could sort of maneuver myself downstairs so the dog could lay on top of me, and then could watch Big Bang Theory on a loop. And that was my existence for about 5 weeks. I mean, I wasn't hospitalized. I spoke to the GP once, but my symptoms were manageable. So I thought I'd gotten off quite lightly. After 5 weeks, I started recovering. And then 2 weeks later, I got hit by a second wave. And it hasn't stopped. I've now hit the part of the cycle where I've stopped saying, yes, I'm recovered, because there's a really good chance I'll wake up tomorrow and I won't be able to get out of bed. So it's been scary. I mean, I think I've shared a lot on social media, because that is kind of my nature anyway, to sort of talk about these things and be open if I possibly can. But the other thing is, because this long-term stuff wasn't being talked about, you were it was either flu or you were dead. And then there's this whole group in the middle. I know I've had people going, well, you must have caught something different. I've had people saying, you must be just imagining it. And, I think now we're starting to realize that there are massive numbers of people for whom this is becoming chronic. So, it's not been fun.
No, I can imagine. Has I mentioned your background at the beginning. Has your training kind of helped in any ways to prepare you for the psychological side of that, of dealing with it?
My training has helped immensely in coping with the stress of the lockdown and the sort of the pandemic situation, because I think this is probably this is the first time in my lifetime we have been in a global catastrophe. And all of my training has been about performance under stress. It's all been focused on this. So I kind of felt like I've been preparing for this my entire life. So it was really good for helping me keep calm. I've been putting, like you said, I put a lot of stuff on Twitter because it made me feel useful. If I could say, I know lots of people are having panic attacks, which they've never had before. I'm a pro. I have them all the time. Let me tell you what they look like and how to handle them. So that was really good because it made me feel like I was still being productive at a time when I couldn't be productive in any other way. I think now I'm in a new phase, is managing the psychological implications of where I am now personally. So that's more challenging. And I'm not through that yet.
Right. Okay. And moving on to you, Amanda, what's your experience been like? Because one of the things people have said to me is, "Oh, you're a writer, so lockdown, quarantine, it doesn't change anything for you." But it does. It's changed sort of quite a lot for me. How have you been? Is it a situation that suits your sort of writing process?
Well, it definitely turns out that writing during an apocalypse is a bit distracting. I'm very like Anna. I'm exactly the same. I need a deadline. I need pressure. I need the panic. So I had a conversation with my editor early on, and I just sort of said, "Oh God, I'm really finding this very hard to write. I can't concentrate. I'm pretty distracted. I don't have the willpower to step away from social media. So I am embroiled in that, and it is distracting. And if the pandemic wasn't enough, there is all the other stuff that adds in to distract. So the whole thing was a sort of ball of distraction outside." And my editor said, "Look, don't worry. All our we have no idea what the shape of publishing is going to look like, and we don't know about our schedules yet. So, don't worry about July. And then obviously recently she said, actually, it's looking like we might be more on schedule than we think. So can you get going? Which has actually slightly helped, because sort of having had that sort of, you're fine, take it easy, enjoy your stress and your anxiety and don't worry about it. I've now had a deadline reimposed. So I'm now on I think I've got 60,000 words of a first draft right before the end of July. So I'm now, I'm now back on it and feeling that good. So I really have to do this now. So
that desire to get going, that urge.
Yeah, but hard. And the other thing that I think that many writers have found is that for many of us, our writing space is at home and it's quiet. So I've now, I used to say goodbye to the kids and Chris at 8 o'clock. And then I'd have this, walk the dog, do the dishwasher, have a bit of a think, write, calm, mosey into the kitchen for my 7th cup of tea, which would invariably be in the microwave trying to heat up again. And then 4:30, everyone would run back in and again, and that would be the sort of, the whirlwind would be back. And without that, their lives are great. They've sort of, Chris isn't commuting and the girls are at home. They're all older, so they're not having to battle homeschooling quite so much. But I've got my space invaded by people and noise, and they were very sweet and said, "Well, we'll keep quiet and we'll just sort of creep past your, where you write." And I was like, "But I know you're there, And believe you me, if I'm not worrying about, the pandemic, I'll be coming to try and talk to you because I don't want to write." So I think for me, I'm looking for a little bit of quiet would be nice.
Yes, quiet would be nice, wouldn't it? I mean, I'm different in that my daily routine, I would drop my son off at school, then I would go to the gym, and then I would go to the pub to write. So that's all just completely gone now. So I'm having to learn to do different stuff. But as I mentioned at the beginning, you do have as well as a deadline, you have a book coming out in July. Are you excited about that? Does it feel different?
To be honest, after I sort of went through the stresses of debut book 2, book 3, I went through a transformative period where I realised that there was nothing that I could do in this industry to make things happen how we want them to happen, and that I call it my Zen phase, and it doesn't last forever, but 80% of my days I try and be Zen about it.
That people had provided, and this one kind of comes from Claire Thompson, sort of, and this is to you, Amit. So how do you think Harry, your character, if you could tell us a little bit about him, how do you think he would deal with lockdown? Do you think would he be doing hard stops on people who are kind of flaunting it? How would he be dealing with it?
I thought this because when lockdown happened, obviously you weren't allowed to go out, and for me, because my books are set exclusively in Bradford, and I get into the streets, I get into real locations and real places. I had to go and see what my city looked like from this sort of dark, brooding, edgy place to a place which was silent. So I managed to get out a couple of times and just and walk through just abandoned city. And in my mind, I was thinking, what would Harry do here? And I was thinking, I think he'd probably take the opportunity to visit some people that probably deserve justice, because he knows exactly where they're going to be. There's fewer places to hide, isn't there, when you're simply not allowed to leave your house. I think he'd be taking the opportunity to right some wrongs in a very unique manner, because that's the other thing with what's happened is all of a sudden as writers we've seen this world which I guess we've only ever seen in movies, or we've only ever seen in sort of dystopian fantasy places where you just like, this would never happen, and then all of a sudden for every single one of us on our doorsteps we're now experiencing something that we've only ever seen in movies. And I think it did add a sort of a different dimension to what I was thinking about Harry. And I took the opportunity just to kind of have a look at what Bradford looks like when it's silent. And I think I will be talking about this to my kids in sort of 34 years time, when I'll be like, I've seen a city where there's literally nobody there. And it was in a weird way, and I don't mean this to sound sort of weird or something, it was beautiful in a way, albeit Armageddon's happening behind the doors. I don't mean to dismiss that, but in a way, I never thought in my lifetime I would ever step into the city of Bradford and see nothing. That for me is probably one of the things that will never leave me, is that it's the silence. You just couldn't hear anything. It was a city asleep. So it was a really unique opportunity to view a city in a different way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You've mentioned that you use Harry as a character to kind of to explore your fears, but also to gain some kind of catharsis. You know, he can deal out the kind of justice that you would like to, but you know, you can't. So the golden question, I suppose, is: is quarantine and is COVID something that you will include in your novels in the future? Is that a way? Does it give you a lens to talk about social issues, and are you intending to do that?
I think because Harry's wife Simon is an A&E sister, she works in the hospital. So I think invariably it may crop up in some of the conversations that they have for the next book that comes out. But I don't think I'll refer to it in any significant way. I think for two reasons. One, I imagine there's a lot of writers out there that will be exploring this in a really specific manner. But two, I worry that we read books to escape real life. And I think that this is so significant that I would worry that by writing about COVID in my next thriller, I'd be almost jarring the reader from the fictional world I've created back to reality. And for me, I always like the reader to maintain and remain in the fiction that I've created. Yeah, I use real locations. Sometimes I use real people. And that adds authenticity to the book because readers tend to enjoy that. Oh, I've been to that pub. I've been to that restaurant. But I think COVID thing might just jar them into, and for some readers, and for a lot of people, COVID will have really bad memories or ramifications for what has happened. And if I'm writing a book and the person's in the zone and they're loving the thriller and they're in the world that Harry's got, and then I mention COVID, and for them it takes them to a bad place, I've just lost my audience. So for me, I don't think I'm going to try not to include it in any way because I use books as escapism. And I just simply don't know, depending on who's reading the book, what experience they've had of COVID.
Yeah, and what associations it might have for them. That's a good point.
Exactly.
Emma, I mean, your latest book, The Devil You Know, it begins with the protagonist hearing an intruder in the house, which would be scary anyway, but in quarantine, doubly scary. You can't have a stranger in your house. It's social distancing. But can you tell us just a little bit about the book to begin with? You know, because it came out in May, didn't it? Kind of at the height of lockdown.
It did. It came out, fully in the middle of lockdown. And it was like Amanda said, it was one of those things where you get so het up for every book release. And this time I'm like, well, you know, good God, we're in apocalypse. Who cares? So The Devil You Know is a linked book in a trilogy. It's not a follow-on to... What was my last book called? It's not a follow-on to Catch a Killer.
To Catch a Killer.
That's the one, yeah. See, brain gone. But it is linked characters, so you've got the same bad guy, and you've got a different point of view protagonist. And it is about a young woman who is she's a psychologist. She's doing her PhD. As you said, it opens with an intruder in the house. And as a result of that, she ends up discovering that she is not who she thought she was, that her entire life has been a lie. And then she goes about trying to find out who she is, where she comes from, and what is her reality. And the joy of this book for me was at the 11th hour, I did that thing to my editor where I went, I've got a really good idea, but I'm going to be late. So I was able to infuse a massive amount of the current psychological literature. So I fully nerded out on this book. And because she's a psychologist and because she's dealing with major psychological implications for herself, I could talk about the real research within the book. And that was just so much fun for me. So it is a very psychologically based book.
Well, you mentioned research there, and I mean, excuse me. I mean, we often research forensics and things like that, you know, as writers, and forensics and things like CCTV, modern developments, they're things that you can't really ignore in the modern crime novel. Do you think that COVID might end up being something a little bit like that, in a sense, that it's so huge and it's had such a huge impact that you couldn't set a book in 2020 without dealing with it in some capacity?
I do. I I almost wonder if it will be like 9/11, in that for the next couple of years, perhaps there'll be, I mean, you know, I'm working on my next book, which will be a standalone, and I have no intention whatsoever of putting COVID in it, for exactly the reasons that you said, is that, you know, I want my readers to be able to step through a door and get away from what's happening. So I wonder if for the next couple of years there'll be this sort of swathe of books that just either ignore it or mention it very peripherally. But then as time moves on, and as we as a society start to heal from it and become a bit more, okay, it's done, that then I'll feel able to start exploring it a bit more. I think for now, it's not something I'm going to do, simply because people need escape. And I know that's why I'm reading now, is to get away. So the last thing I want to read about is COVID.
It's interesting. Yeah, so you do you think it will drive readers kind of away from darker fiction? I mean, this is to all of you, I suppose, in a way. Do you think that readers aren't going to want to address that? Do you think, you know, the publishers as well might perhaps want to avoid it?
No, I think if anything, it'll drive people to darker fiction. I think darker fiction provides a true escape for people sometimes, and I think as long as everybody said, as long as it's not soaked in COVID and coronavirus and pandemic and apocalypse, I think people will still want to explore fears and, you know, the darker side of humanity that's come to, because also it starts to have, you can start to draw, as a person and a reader, you start to draw parallels with reality with what you're reading in books. So I think people do like to do that. Talking about what Emma was saying about, I have actually, so I was writing my book, as we said, before the pandemic, and I decided that I couldn't possibly cope with it. My book is due to come out next year, July 2021, I think. It was set in February 2021, and my brain exploded as I tried to think about, this was back in March, when I thought, I don't know, everyone might be dead, I can't, what can I do? That shouldn't come with a laugh, I'm sorry, that was a very inappropriate laugh. So actually what I did was I set it back in February 2019, I took a deep breath and I thought, fine, I can cope with that, that's fine. And then about a month ago, I suddenly thought, no, I'm going to do this. I'm really lucky in that the main character happens to be, for completely different reasons, a hermit living on Bodmin Moor in a derelict and the backstory is set in 2000 with a sort of Svengali type character who wants to set up a commune and distance himself from society. And I actually suddenly thought, this is a massive opportunity for me to be able to reference the pandemic in a very sort of, you know, in a sort of very, very, very peripheral way. So I do have references now of sort of, you know, when they came out of lockdown, but nothing more than a sort of glancing reference, a little bit like Emma said about 9/11, where you do have that sort of, every now and then someone will just reference it, or a cultural reference will come in. And actually, I have to say, I'm in the positive mood. If you ask me in an hour, I'll probably say it's all a terrible idea and I can't possibly write it. But at the moment, it seems to be sort of quite comforting that I can imagine that life is returned to a sort of semblance of normality by February next year. Maybe.
Well, it would be lovely to think so, wouldn't it? But let's talk about your most recent book at the moment, the one that's coming out. The Storm, isn't it? Is coming out. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so basically it's set in, the modern day thread has Hannah married to Nathan. Hannah, to the outside world, has it all, has the beautiful Cornish estate, the husband who's a handsome lawyer. He's an absolute monster behind closed doors. There's no violence, but it's coercive control at its highest level, from telling her what to wear, from keeping her passport locked away, from going through her receipts with a fine tooth comb. And the idea behind it was that you often hear people, when they look at relationships like that from the outside, asking the question, why does he or why does she stay? So I wanted to ask that question. And to do that, I put a significant event back in the late 90s that affected Hannah in a way that prompted her to end up in this situation. And although she might look like a victim, this is very much of her own making. So I suppose the backstory is set in the Newlyn be ready for this, the Newlyn fishing industry of the late 90s on a fishing trawler with a group of fishermen. And talking about research, I had huge amounts of research because it meant sitting on my sofa watching editions of Trawler Wars back to back, which was brilliant. But yeah, so we have this sort of backstory that comes together as the front story moves on, hopefully.
And do you think that if you were working on that now, you would bring COVID into it? Because actually lockdown, would that kind of enhance the pressure in that kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of situation?
Yeah, and that's really fascinating to me as well, is that my characters, Hannah and Nathan, Hannah's life would be an absolute misery in right now in lockdown, because her entire the way that she copes with what she's doing is have this routine which takes her out for her dog walks or to her shop to meet her best friend in a secret cafe once a week, and without that she is stuck in that claustrophobic environment, completely a prisoner behind those walls. So for her, this would be a horrendous situation. It actually would be quite in a parallel world. I'm exploring that as an idea, because alongside the couple that got stranded in the Maldives, on the island, and they had the entire hotel staff having to wait on them, and I think that would be a really fascinating story to tell as well. That sort of, the claustrophobia there. But yeah, so I think in a way, she would have had a horrendous time, but that might in itself have been a pretty good tale about loneliness and isolation and what you do when you're in that situation.
Absolutely. So just moving on to a few more general questions that a few people did ask me this, but I'm going to mention John Mosby and Sue Charman-Anderson, who put two different sides to this. Has the response to COVID, both socially and politically, affected your attitude to human nature? Has it made you more cynical or more hopeful? Start with you, Anna.
More hopeful, I think. I guess just from a pharmacy front line, the amount of people that were coming in to collect, prescriptions for their neighbours, the amount of people that were just saying thank you. I mean, you can imagine that, nobody's going to go to A&E, nobody can get to their doctor. We're literally the only people with our doors open, and it was so stressful, but everybody was delightful, and everybody was polite, and everybody was understanding. And I did genuinely. I thought the opposite might happen because of the stress of it, but actually, overwhelmingly, people were nice. In terms of has it increased my confidence in hierarchy? No, I think that I think it has been an unprecedented, difficult situation, but I think that governmental response has been poor. But from a on the ground, I think I've seen, just even like from a neighbourly point of view, do you know what I mean? Like, we live in a world where you might take your neighbours for granted, or you see them every day, and it's normally just a hi, hello, or you wave at them, when you're both taking your kids to school or something. But as opposed to this time, it's, do you need anything? How are you? How can we help? Who are our neighbours who are elderly and might be vulnerable? What do they need? And I think that we've all asked ourselves those questions. About what can we do to help other people, and I think that's, for me, that is the British spirit. And I think in a time where identity is up for grabs and there's so much toxicity on Twitter or Facebook about identity and who belongs and who has the right to be here, is that British spirit of trying to help other people who are local to you, or maybe even sometimes not local to you, I think has absolutely shone through. And that's my own personal view on it. I don't know what the rest of the panel think, but from my perspective, it's been a really positive experience for seeing people integrate and communicate.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And early days in the middle of March, I set up the village on account of the fact that I am on social media. So I took it upon myself to set up the village Facebook mutual aid group. And I think within about probably 2 or 3 days, we had 160 people signed up. We were organised into WhatsApp groups for roads, looking after doing exactly that, going to collect prescriptions for people and shop for people. And even now, one of the ladies in one of our WhatsApp groups bakes cakes every single week on a Wednesday and a Sunday for some of us to deliver to elderly people who are living on their own, with little messages saying, dear Frank, lots of love from, with hearts. And then her sister crocheted a little heart to decorate on some of the boxes. And that's every week since Easter. And I feel exactly the same. At the beginning, there was so much hope and coming together, and it was almost as if we sort of said, we don't really care what the government's doing. This is what we're going to do in our community, and this is how we're going to help. And that was, I mean, it has faded now, as everything always fades. Toxicity has come into it, but I think people will remember. I do think people will remember how we came together, and it will no longer be the Blitz spirit. It'll be the pandemic spirit of 2020, and I feel quite uplifted by that. Certainly going forward, myself and my family, our village will certainly maintain those memories, I hope.
So, at the risk of being dark and cynical compared to, you know, the hope and joy from that side, what I have noticed, and what is quite fascinating to me, is there has been a fundamental sense of people are who people are, irrespective of the global situation. Because I think when we first went into it, I know we've experienced this, we thought, well, you know, we're in a crisis. People will band together, you know, people will be more generous and more hopeful and kinder. And for some people, that has definitely been true. I mean, you know, we had neighbours dropping off groceries for us when we couldn't leave the house. You know, we've had sort of friends checking in on us. And then we've had other people who, irrespective of the global situation, have remained as they've always been. And for me, as somebody who is fascinated by how people behave under stress, I've always kind of believed that stress strips away everything else and leaves us as we are. You know, you don't have the capacity to perform when you're under stress, because of the way your brain functions and the way it changes your ability to think. And it's been quite fascinating to see people strip back to who they are. And for some people, that has been a wonderful thing. For others, less so. Sorry.
No, I think you're probably right, but I think I'm going to bring the hope back in again and say that overall, maybe it's enough, but I don't think this is the case, because I think the big cities found it as well. So I think even though that will be the case, I think the overriding feeling was one of cooperation. But
I think what we've seen is absolutely that initial period of social banding together, of hope, of, you know, we're in this together, we have to work as a team. But you said about things fading, and I think the problem with any major disaster is that fading often turns to anger.
Yeah.
And often the anger is directed at helpers. I think, you know, we've seen the sort of the start of social unrest. We've seen, like, Twitter for a while became such you couldn't go on it, and because it was so
horrible,
angry, so angry. And if you look at the psychology of how people react to major disasters, there's always an anger phase. And I do wonder if it's almost a, why did this happen to me? This is so unfair. But I think that it's been interesting to see how people manage it. You know, there have been people who've kind of internalized it and gone, this is just so unfair, and yet to everybody else have carried on being thoughtful and kind and wonderful. And then there have been others who have just gone, rah. So, you know, I think from a psychologist's point of view, it's been quite fascinating. Slightly traumatizing, but, you know.
All right, so this is a slightly lighter question from Geetha Lodge. What's been your favourite lockdown snack? Is there something that you've turned to?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Favourite lockdown snack? I don't know, because we've had the kids home with us quite a lot. We're both key workers, so it hasn't been we haven't been just on total lockdown with the children. But we have to spend more time with them. So I have to say that my lockdown snack is probably Haribo's, just because I've had to use, and I don't eat Haribo's normally, but I've had to, like, you know, get a big packet and then drip feed it to the children every sort of couple of hours when they're just about to lose their heads. You know what I mean? Because so for me, yeah, it would probably be children I'd love to say luxurious chocolate cake or something really magnificent, but it's actually those cheap and cheerful penny sweets from a corner shop. That is what I have been. That's what's been managed. And it's literally distributing them to the family to keep everybody calm. It's just like, okay, right, everyone's about to lose their shit. It's Haribo. And in the house now, my kids are just like, they're 4 and 5, and they're just like, Daddy, it's Haribo time. And I'm just like, yes, it's Haribo time.
It's always Haribo time. Emma?
Hot chocolate.
Hot chocolate.
Yeah, we've done that thing where, again, when everybody's about to lose it, my husband will go, right, who wants hot chocolate with marshmallows melted on top? So I ordered a box of marshmallows and ended up with about 4,000 packets of the mini ones, which are all gone. But it's been like that kind of symbol of, let's pull it back together now.
For me, is gin and tonic a snack? Yeah?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Yes. 2 of your 5 a day. And as we kind of draw towards a close here, and end on a kind of positive, hopeful note. So this is kind of 2 questions, but they may have the same answer for all of you. Is what have you kind of personally missed the most during this? What's been the kind of the hardest thing that you've not been able to do or have had access to? And conversely, what are you most looking forward to as we move out of lockdown? I don't know who wants to go first.
I'll go.
Yeah.
I've missed desperately spending time with my friends. As much as I love my family, I do miss spending time with people who I haven't given birth to or married. And so when we come out of lockdown, I can't wait to just sort of hang out and talk about ridiculous stuff. And I also can't wait to go swimming again. I miss swimming desperately.
I'm the same probably as Emma. I think friends, but I'd add in also hugs. I think that I'm very tactile person, as most of you will know and probably avoid me at festivals. I do love jumping on people for hugs, and I think that's been the hardest thing for me. Even in my late 40s, I still realise how important those are to me, and especially as lockdown started to ease and we were able to see our family a little bit, not being able to hug them hello or goodbye felt very, very odd. So actually I'm going to tie that in with the thing I'm looking forward to most. I'm looking forward to running up to my sister and giving her the most enormous hug, and just generally being a little bit more tactile. So people who like their personal space, watch out, I'm coming for you.
And
I think for me, I've just missed the city of Bradford, to be honest. I mean, I spend every week we have a restaurant that we go to every week. It's a local place. I've been going there since I was a kid. I've missed Bradford Waterstones, just sitting upstairs in the cafe with my laptop or a book and just enjoying being surrounded by books in a magnificent wool exchange. I think I've just missed my city, to be honest, because we spent so much time locked at home or work. It has literally been you're at the pharmacy or you're in the house. You're at the pharmacy, you're in the house. And I think just sort of, just connecting with the city again, whether it's my local restaurant or Waterstones or just walking around the streets. I'm like that. I tend to walk around, just talk to people randomly. So I've just missed the city.
Yeah.
Right, well, a huge thank you to all 3 of you for coming to talk to me today. And it's at this point normally that I would tell the audience that you're signing in the tent afterwards or something like that. But obviously, unfortunately, I can't do that. But to all the viewers, these guys' books are brilliant and you should go out and buy them immediately. I hope that you've enjoyed this panel as much as possible. And there's more videos like it available on the Harrogate International Festival site, on the HIF player. They're all great. You should watch them all. And thank you very much for watching. Stay safe. And I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say that I hope that we'll see you sort of in person in the future. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Steve.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining us. If you have enjoyed this event as part of the Harrogate International Festivals, please do think about a donation to ensure that our festivals can survive in the future. Donations can be made by texting HIF and the amount to 70085. For more events, please visit our online hub, the HIF Player. It's packed with upcoming live streams, events you've missed, archive recordings, and much more.
My name's Mark Edwards and I write psychological thrillers for Thomas and Mercer. They're books in which scary things happen to ordinary people. I started out self-publishing in 2011 and then in 2013 I was signed to Thomas and Mercer, and now I've published 8 books with Thomas and Mercer, sold 2 million books and had 7 #1 bestsellers. The marketing support that I get from Amazon is fantastic, so whenever I have a new novel out, people know that it's out there and my readers can find it very easily. I constantly receive emails and messages from readers. They say really nice things. For example, they hadn't read a book for years, or they'd gone off reading and then they'd read one of my books and it had reinvigorated their love of reading. It's really nice to receive messages like that. Amazon are really great at consulting the author, letting me know what's going on, asking questions. It feels like a partnership. It feels like we're working together to further my career and sell as many books as possible. One of the most exciting things when Follow You Home, my 3rd book, hit the top 10 in the USA, and it sold 500,000 copies, and it was fantastic. It was a life-changing amount of books that were sold. Another highlight was when The Retreat hit #1 in the bestseller charts on its first day of release. Ever since I was a kid listening to the top 40, I've always wanted to be able to say that I'd gone straight in at #1, and I achieved it when that happened.